I want to talk about communion, but before I get into exactly what it is about communion that I want to talk about or what's on my mind, I'll start with some background on what communion is and use that to kind of set up where my mind is at the moment and why this is a topic that I feel is worth discussing. So I think most folks are familiar with the concept of communion, certainly if they've been in or around the church for any period of time in their life. For most people, especially people from my kind of background where I'm a American Protestant, grew up in a non-denominational church, currently attend a non-denominational church, communion is just kind of an exercise that is done at some, probably regular frequency, where you have a little cracker, you have a little juice, you talk a little bit about the Last Supper and Christ's sacrifice, and you call that communion. I am purposely kind of downplaying the significance of it in terms of how we tend to treat it, because that's actually the reason that it's on my mind. I attended church yesterday and we did communion. We took communion. And it's interesting because we don't seem to commune very much in that process. So let's go back to exactly what this is, why we do it, what it's meant to accomplish, or what we are supposed to be getting out of it, and see if we can kind of make our way back to why some of the things that I'm describing might be a little bit of a misapplication, misrepresentation, or a maybe just a missed opportunity for us to deepen our faiths. So obviously, most of us know that when we talk about communion, we are talking about the Lord's Supper, which comes from the Last Supper, which is a meal that Jesus had with his disciples, where he explained to them essentially that he was the Passover lamb, that the meal took place actually within the context of a Passover celebration that already had some rituals and things around it that were meant to symbolize this coming Savior, which Christ was actually fulfilling, getting ready to fulfill by going to the cross and being sacrificed, but also to represent a story from the book of Exodus that many of us are familiar with, where the Israelites were freed from captivity, freed from slavery in the land of Egypt through some plagues. And I think in order to properly understand some of the context around this Last Supper, I think it helps to start with actually the first plague that happens in Egypt, rather than the final plague that the Passover is named for. So the first plague that takes place is actually the turning of water into blood in the land of Egypt. So a little bit more context is that Egypt is holding these Israelite slaves, and God wants the Israelites to be free and to no longer be enslaved by Egypt. He wants to demonstrate not only to the Israelites that he is sovereign and that they are his chosen people and that he will protect them and guide them and lead them to the promised land. But in doing so, he is using the world that they live in and demonstrating his power through miracles that the Pharaoh would have to reckon with to be shown that, in fact, he was not the most powerful person, and that he did not have the right to enslave God's people, but that God would do these acts in the land to demonstrate his power and eventually convince Pharaoh to let his people go, as the saying goes. So the first plague that comes to accomplish this is the turning of water into blood. And the reason that I think that is significant is that when Jesus begins his earthly ministry, the first thing that we see him do is turn water into wine. So this happens at a wedding celebration, and they have run out of wine and they need more. And so Mary, his mother, comes to him and tells him that they need more wine. And so he performs his first miracle by filling some jugs with water and turning that water into wine. And so I think the reason that is significant is that the parallel to the water into blood and the water into wine demonstrates kind of the parallel of the blood to wine. So using the wine to represent the blood is more than just that the Passover meal celebration is using wine as a symbol, as a symbolic representation of what took place at Passover, which I'll get into in just a minute. But it's also kind of a callback to Christ and his actual ministry, that it was no longer going to be the blood of lambs that would pay the price for human sin and suffering, but that there would be this once and for all sacrifice from Christ that we would then acknowledge through this meal that we do together as Christians. So the final plague that helped free the Israelites from Egyptian control was the Passover. It was actually the death of firstborn children in the land of Israel, or in the land of Egypt, and the only way to avoid it was to sacrifice a lamb and put the blood of that lamb above the door of your house. So if your house had this blood covering it, then your house would be passed over as God's wrath was being brought upon the people in the land of Egypt. So it was a demonstration of faith by the Israelites to do this, and in so doing, they were spared. And it was after that plague that Pharaoh finally decided to let the Israelites free from slavery. And even though he did end up changing his mind, and that's where we get the parting of the Red Sea and that whole story, that idea of God rescuing his people, of him protecting and saving people who chose to have faith and believe through that painting of blood on their door, that was celebrated in the Jewish community and still is celebrated in the Jewish community as the holiday Passover. And so it was this meal of Passover that Christ is participating in with his disciples, where he essentially tells them that the Passover lamb that you're celebrating is me, that I am fulfilling that this is in fact my blood that's being represented by this wine, and my body that is being represented by this bread. And so he instructs them to do this in remembrance of him after he is gone, to continue to do this meal and to continue to use it to commune with one another, which is why we call it communion, to remember him, and do this to also encourage unity among his body of believers here on this earth, or his church. And so a lot of traditions and denominations, a lot of sects of Christianity view this and treat this very differently, and there are different opinions on whether it's truly Christ's body and blood that's being consumed, whether certain elements should be used or not used in certain ways, like drinking wine, which is, of course, alcohol, whether that's appropriate or not. And so over time, things have changed and adapted for the sake of societal norms, comfort, whatever seemed like it made the most sense and was justifiable by the participants, I think is the easiest way to say it. It would be nice to say that everything was done with a clear Christ-focused conscience and that it could all be justified. My fear, though, and the reason that I am here talking about it now, is that we have not necessarily taken that approach as much as we like to think. And so when I sit in my Protestant non-denominational church today, I find myself questioning how we've come so far, or how we've managed to remove this ritual practice so far from the deep meaning it is meant to conjure and remind us of. So a few examples of that would be the fact that, number one, at least in the context of my church, and we actually just did communion yesterday, we didn't commune really much at all. There wasn't a lot of interaction between fellow believers. There wasn't a shared experience, really. We were given, or we kind of grabbed from a basket on the way in, what I call communion Lunchables, a little cup of juice with a little cracker attached, and everyone had their own individual package, and they were to consume these at a particular time within the service that, as we were directed. So that's the first challenge for me, is that we're not communing very often when we do this. I actually heard a pastor, or I don't know, a leader of a church. I have a hard time calling this person a pastor, but I heard them recently make the argument that we should make better communion Lunchables, as I call them. We should make them taste better, make them more enjoyable, more pleasurable to those consuming them, which I have a hard time even understanding how a person who calls himself a believer and is the leader of a faith community is so blind to what he's arguing for, that apparently for him it all comes down to what is the best experience for the human. But even though we're literally celebrating the fact that the human that we are all most appreciative of is the one who was least concerned about his own comfort. But nevertheless, this is what we do. We make it about ourselves, and we focus on what is going to make it best for us. And I think these little communion Lunchables make it easy for us to not have to interact with anybody, make it easy for us to kind of get in and get out and do our thing and not have to worry about those around us. I remember when I was a kid, back in the 90s, we had communion at church, a different church than the one I attend now, but it was still a Protestant, non-denominational American church. We did communion on the first Sunday of every month, and we had like a little plate that got passed around, and it basically had crackers broken up and, in bits on the plate, and you just took one piece off of the plate as it came across the aisle, and then they passed around little cups of juice that were poured from a bottle of grape juice, and so everybody took their little cup. And even though I still think we're missing some important elements, which I'll get into in a minute, I could at least, I look back at that and think, man, even that was a vast improvement from these little communion Lunchables that we have now. At least we were all drinking from the same original bottle of grape juice, even though at the moment we had our individual cups. There was at least some reason to believe we were sharing in a joint exercise. And the pieces of cracker we knew were coming from, the same crackers. That a piece that I got was also, was part of a cracker that someone else also was consuming. So we were at least together in that. I would prefer personally that we were having, real bread together, and that we were kind of sitting together, participating together. But to think that in just that short time of my life that we've gone from even something like, consuming a shared cracker that was split up to everybody has their own individual pre-packaged, sealed cracker. And part of me thinks, I understand to a certain extent why we might like that. I also think that, after COVID and 2020, everybody's a little more on edge about intermingling germs and things like that. And so sealed packaging is maybe a little more conducive to participation, or makes people a little more confident that it is safe to consume. But it kind of makes me feel like we're missing another part of communion by doing that, which is that the early church, as they were doing this ritual and having this meal with each other, especially as they were adding new numbers, and we didn't always know kind of the background of those folks. We know from some of the things that Paul wrote about that there were, different classes and, levels of wealth and different ethnic backgrounds. And so it was a challenge for the early church to kind of learn to commune together, to learn to, participate in unity. And I think this exercise of eating a meal together really puts a strain on that. And so I think it actually would be really beneficial to be forced to sit and have meals with people that, look different, have different experiences, have different struggles, maybe not as clean or presentable as we would prefer. And so I think by having these kind of separate sealed packages for our communion, we're actually really hindering our ability to love one another in that way. To say that I don't want to eat after somebody else may seem logical and safe and a well-calculated decision in the 21st century, but such luxuries didn't necessarily exist, when Christ was around. And so I think our willingness to set aside our own desires for safety and comfort are greatly sacrificed by the way we do this. And that brings me to another part of this struggle that I have with communion, the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, whatever terms we want to use for it, as we, perform this ritual in its current state, or at least in the state of the church that I attend and churches that I have attended for most of my life, is that I don't think I've ever taken communion at a church where we drank actual wine. It's always been some form of juice, grape juice or something else. And I have never actually consumed alcohol in my life at all, really on purpose. I accidentally took a sip once of an alcoholic drink, but I am certainly not somebody who is arguing for the consumption of alcohol just for the sake of the consumption of alcohol. Even if I went to a church that offered it, I don't even know if I would take it. I would have to wrestle with that. But I do think it's interesting that the more we remove kind of the elements that were present and essential at the inception of this ritual or this sacrament, that we just pull ourselves further and further from the reality of what is meant by it. And to what I was saying earlier about the things that we are meant to learn, the takeaways, the appreciation, the love for Christ and what he did, the love for his body and his people are all, I think, at the very least compromised, and at most are completely neglected in this new practice. And I think we continue to do it knowing that it's a calling in Scripture that it needs to happen, but are we really doing it because we want to honor Christ fully, or are we trying to check a box and making it as easy to participate in as possible without really considering the implications of kind of abstracting out every detail until we're basically left with a communion lunchable. So those are my thoughts on communion. I will talk more in the future about kind of my struggles in general. I think there's a lot of ways in which we as Protestants have strayed so far from some of the deeper meaning of traditions and teachings of the church. I will say I'm not at all tempted to, become Catholic or Orthodox. At this point, I don't think it's very likely that I ever will, but I do think that there are some things that those among us who come from these Protestant traditions really need to wrestle with, and really need to understand where we stand and if we are really getting some of these things right. And just because it's kind of what the environment was like when we grew up, or the things that we heard or saw, and that it's not, the Catholics or the Orthodox or some other denomination that we think is, heretical, that can't be the bare minimum. That can't be the bar by which we judge everything. And I think if we were to take an honest look at what this activity is meant to convey and to teach and to conjure up within us, I think we would maybe reconsider some of the way that we are approaching communion.